What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing why you should shoot everything in street photography, to photograph with no limits, and what this means to me and how we can apply this to our everyday lives. Essentially, I like to bring the camera for the ride. I simply want to live my everyday life and snapshot my way through life. No longer am I a slave to my camera by going out there with a theme, a project, or a preconceived idea of what kind of photographs I want to make. But I simply go out there in the spirit of play and chip away at life with each press of the shutter. And I find that by photographing with no limits, I'm tapping into this endless stream of becoming. Similar to this water crashing upon the shoreline here at the beach, we too are forever in flux and change. And I remind myself that you cannot make the same photograph twice. That the way in which light casts upon surfaces, people, places, and things will always provide a nuance or a gradual change, depending on the time of day, depending on the change of seasons, etc. And every day is different, and every photograph you make will be different. And so I remind myself when looking out at the horizon that this world is so open. There's so much to do, to see, to explore, and to photograph. And so when the snow fell here in my city, Philadelphia, we have this very simple scene where the snow is covering the trail and there's a single runner, and I'm photographing this skyline. And I could visit this same bridge over and over again and photograph this same view, this same skyline, this same vista each and every day for the rest of my life, but the photograph will never be the same, for you cannot make the same photograph twice. Here, photographing a boy playing in the snow from a different vantage point, shooting across the skyline of Philadelphia once again, but from a different perspective. And essentially, I remind myself this simple fact that you cannot make the same photograph twice, because it puts me in this flow state of production, of shooting way more photos than I probably should, where everything is beautiful again. And essentially breaking free from any limitations has provided me with this abundant feeling when I'm out there practicing street photography, where the smallest details that are overlooked become something interesting for me to photograph, where I'm no longer looking for the perfect moment, but I'm shooting through that imperfection and I'm photographing reality as it unfolds. I find that it's very easy to box yourself in to one style or one way of doing things, but to break free actually requires more courage, to get out of the box and to shoot more liberally and to photograph through your intuition and embrace imperfection. Actually, perhaps can become our version of perfection. And so when I'm out there on the streets, I enter this flow, I enter this sort of stream of becoming, where I'm just photographing what comes to me, photographing the people on the street, photographing the details of the flowers, shooting these very striking moments of the man with the cigarette. But then also I'm interested in the patterns, and I'm interested in these strange things that I find on the streets. I'm not necessarily limiting myself to only photographing in a particular way with a particular theme, but I'm actually allowing myself to play more on the street and photograph the nuances and the differences that I find throughout my journey. And actually, the mindset shift is very simple. It's the simple idea that everything is photographable. And so I believe the best way to get better at street photography is to shoot more, to simply shoot everything, because over time compounded of you making more photographs, ultimately you will improve and you'll be able to enter this groove and find your rhythm and find your style on the streets. And so I suggest to stop waiting for the perfect moment to press the shutter. Stop waiting and hesitating when you're on the street. But if something piques your curiosity, simply press the shutter. I find that ultimately the name of the game, it's in the mundane, right? And the question I ask myself is, can I walk the same mundane lane every single day, but still find something to uplift in a photograph? This to me is the challenge of street photography. It's going out there with the routine of living your everyday life, but still finding something beautiful to uplift in a photograph. And so I find that by going out there and tapping into my curiosity and basically treating everything as a potential photograph to make, I'm increasing my curiosity, which allows me to go out there and to photograph different moments, whether I'm photographing my personal moments with family or intimate scenes under the Coney Island boardwalk on the beach, where we have strangers at the scene dancing and enjoying their day. I find that ultimately the more you shoot, the more you see, where I treat photography as a way for me to see the world each day anew. And the more that you see, the more that you evolve, the more that you change, and the more that you grow. And to me, I find that to change is happiness. And so by making new photographs each and every day, I'm in this constant stream of evolution, of change and transformation through the photographic process, through me pushing my limits and trying to tap into my creativity, to tap into my curiosity, to tap into new ways of seeing the same thing over and over again. And so I suggest to not limit yourself to photographing strictly candid moments of people, but to look up and to photograph the birds in flight, to photograph the details, to photograph the people, and to photograph more, and to photograph with no limits. For me, essentially by shooting with no limits, I'm training my eye to respond faster through my intuition. Sometimes the best shots are the ones that you almost didn't take. For instance, here at this scene outside of City Hall in Philadelphia, we have this very mundane moment where this man was making a selfie, and he was actually just chilling in front of the fountain. But as the smoke emerged and he entered the smoke, I remained patient and I photographed through the scene and ultimately came home with a more intriguing photograph that has a bit of a magic touch to it, which I find to be visually and emotionally interesting, right, and compelling. And so essentially by photographing with no limits, you're going to build an unfiltered visual diary of your day, where every photograph you make becomes a personal touch. It becomes your own vision. And I think that by going limitless, you really tap into who you are as a human being and as a photographer, where your curiosity and your intuition drive you out there and allow you to photograph through that gut instinct. And I find this to be the best place in terms of shooting style and shooting approach in street photography is through photographing in a variety of different ways, through photographing the unseen, looking beyond the obvious and photographing the textures, the signs, the empty streets, photographing the atmosphere, not necessarily just the people, looking up, looking down low, shooting macro, shooting different perspectives. The different things that we find on the streets can become infinitely fascinating through the lens of our camera and through the way that we look and perceive the world. And so I encourage you to disconnect from all notions of what street photography is or what it should be, but go out there and explore what it could be and make sure that you're tapping into the different multifaceted complexities that exist in the world, in life, on the street. And so I like to photograph a variety of things. I enjoy walking through the park and using the macro feature on my camera to photograph insects or these different moments in nature, whether I'm photographing the trees, looking up at the beautiful architecture, or even the bugs that exist in nature, right? I'm looking around me and I'm finding infinite possibilities through going limitless and to photograph more than less, essentially. Photographing the textures and the way the water and the waterfall creates these visual patterns. Photographing the newspapers and the way they clump up and these discarded pieces of trash are lying there on the street for me to photograph. Photographing the textures on the wall and the different posters and the wear and tear and the things that are left behind, right? And so I essentially treat every photograph that I make as a question mark. When I'm out there and I'm photographing, I'm simply wondering why, what is this? And I'm making sure that I chip away at life through the click of the shutter. And so I simply treat each photograph as a question. And I'm having this dialogue with the world, with myself, and with the universe. And I'm just curious, essentially, at the end of the day. And through photography, I find that it gives me this ability to understand not only my surroundings, but also my personal self on a deeper level. And so I go out there and I embrace the spirit of play. I'm not necessarily judging when I make a photograph whether or not it's going to be good or bad. I simply make the photograph first and ask questions later, right? And so when I look at some of the photographs, some of these moments where I'm photographing this simple like ant or a fly here on the ground, in the moment I make the photo, I'm like, who knows what this will manifest to be in a photo. But honestly, when I look back at the photo, I personally resonate with it. I really enjoy this image. And I don't necessarily have any attachments to whether or not an audience or somebody else or the street photography gods are gonna say that this is street photography or not, or this is a good photo or not, right? But I'm simply allowing myself to photograph life itself and to essentially allow this natural progression of my personal vision to transform and evolve over time through photographing without limits, and not necessarily analyzing a composition or a moment in that split second when I'm pressing the shutter and thinking whether or not it's going to be good or bad. For here, when I was in Central Park, I just love walking through parks, and I observed this scene of these children playing along the rocks as they were climbing, and it may seem to be this cliche moment. Oh, this isn't a good photo. This is something it's already been done before, right? Like these kind of silhouette photos. But for me, I personally resonate with this moment. This is something that comes from my soul. This is something that I find reflects my lust for life. And I love these very simple moments that I photograph these days, where it's not necessarily reliant on these extraordinary events or things that occur on the streets, but the mundane moments of everyday life intrigue me even more. And so I've been experimenting with different techniques here. I'm photographing with an exposure that is very much underexposed. I actually have on my Ricoh GR3X, the Ricoh GR3, I think I used the crop mode. And so I went from 28 millimeters to 50 millimeters in the camera using the crop mode. I've been shooting from the hip, embracing blur, not necessarily trying to make perfect photographs, other times shooting with precision, using shadows, using light, silhouettes, layers, reflections, right? Trying to use the 28 millimeter on the Ricoh GR3, and then going to the Ricoh GR3X most recently, I'm playing with the different perspectives, the different focal lengths, and the different ways in which I approach the streets. Sometimes the macro feature intrigues me, and I'll drop really low and get close to different things. And so I photograph with a variety of new techniques, now shooting these vertical frames. As you can see on the screen, we have 3 different photographs of people with hats. We have on the left-hand side an Amish man in a butcher shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In the center of the frame, we have the Chinese New Year celebration. And then on the right-hand side, we have the Day of the Dead here in South Philadelphia. And so I've been shooting with vertical formats, which is very new for me and something I've never done before. And I encourage you to also play with the orientation of your camera. And so now when I approach a scene or I approach a moment, I know in the back of my head that I don't need to limit myself to the traditional horizontal frame anymore, but to shoot vertically, I can actually create more compelling imagery. And so I shoot reflection photos, like here we have these Jewish men celebrating on a Shabbat Friday, and I photograph through the puddle to make the photograph a bit more mysterious and interesting. Or seeing a simple gesture of a man holding his hands above his head before he crosses the street, and placing my camera as close as physically possible, using the macro mode to make this candid photo. And so I'm shooting cars, I'm shooting things that I maybe haven't shot before, because I'm going limitless, because I'm photographing without any preconceived idea of what I should photograph, right? Because in the past I would strictly photograph people, photograph moments, trying to create something that showcases pretty much just humanity itself. But now these remnants of humanity, such as the architecture, the cars, the details, these things are also fair game for me. And so I'm experimenting, I'm tinkering more. I'm looking at the way the light is reflected off of this mirror in a trash can, and I'm overexposing to allow the light to emanate through my lens and to create this dramatic effect and this mysterious image of this woman smoking a cigarette. And so the street is your playground. Once you stop limiting yourself, the streets become this infinite canvas to draw upon, this infinite playground for us to play upon. And, I think that there's no wrong or right way to do things, right? So essentially, don't wait for other people's approval. Don't go out there and photograph for an agenda, for a project, a theme. Don't photograph for others. I encourage you to delete your Instagram account if you want to tap into creating your own visual world, your own depiction of reality, So going forward, I essentially shoot constantly. I'm basically living my everyday life and taking the camera for the ride. And that's a very core part of my philosophy these days, where I have no destination in mind. I simply live my life and snapshot my way through it. And so this is why I believe the Ricoh is the best camera for street photography, because there is no limitations. Essentially, you can fit it straight in your front right pocket and make pictures throughout the day, wherever you may be. And so this, to me, provides this infinite possibility where, in these different situations that I never photographed in before, I'm now photographing in because I always have the camera with me in my front right pocket. And so I simply treat every day as a new day, and I treat every photograph anew. And I essentially have this philosophy where the next photograph I make will be my best photograph, and this pushes me forward and has me constantly inspired to go out there and to simply see what reality will manifest to be in a photograph. For ultimately, through photographing without limits, through photographing, through my curiosity and my intuition, I'm improving my photography, I believe, because the more that you walk, the more that you see. The more that you see, the more that you photograph. And the more that you photograph, the more that you learn. And the more that you learn, the more curious you will become. And this sort of cycle of curiosity and transformation intrigues me. And so I encourage you to make more photographs, to stop trying to be so perfect, and to simply let the chips fall as they may and photograph in your own unique way. And recognize that the journey is endless and infinite, and there are so many different ways and possibilities for us to make new photographs. You just have to go out there and to photograph more, and to photograph loosely, and to go out there and to explore. And so I hope some of the thoughts I have in this video inspire you to go out there and to shoot without limits. If you'd like to read more about street photography, feel free to visit dantesisifo.com or my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/streetphotography. Thank you all for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.